I'm pretty sure you guys know this icon. Mr. Low Level Learning. He's been in chat before here, and this icon, for those of you who don't know, this is a kernel level anti-cheat. Best anti-cheat, apparently, yeah. It's supposed to be really good, which I find very interesting, because recently I actually did play League of Legends, and I had to install this, and I can tell you, League of Legends will not work if this is not running on your machine. And so you have to have this installed as a separate program just to play League of Legends. Valorant as well, yeah. So essentially Riot Games. And so I would like to know what he means by I was right, because there was a lot of controversy about this type of stuff.
I was right. I love being right. I was right in 2000.
Microsoft paves the way for Linux gaming success with the plan that would kill kernel-level anti-cheat. Microsoft has officially announced its intent to move security measures out of the kernel. Aha! And so then we don't need these kernel programs anymore that do anti-cheat there. Let's see.
When I told my mom to buy Google, she didn't, by the way. I was right when I told my wife that you can put the t-shirts in the dishwasher and it does the exact same thing. You don't need a clothes washer. And I was right about kernel mode anti-cheat.
You can put t-shirts in the dishwasher? Really? I mean, wouldn't it? But that, like, it would block all of the water. And it would just leave a very wet t-shirt. And you couldn't put in much. You could put pancakes in an air fryer and make pancakes, but you know, perverts. True, just try it. I don't know about this. You can put anything in the dishwasher, anything that will fit. I see. Not really that washing is based on fabric friction against each other to remove dirt. Yeah, that's how I see it too, you know. I don't know about this. What are you talking, Mr. Low Level?
Microsoft paves the way for Linux gaming success with a plan that would kill kernel-level anti-cheat, and if you didn't already guess it, it has to do with the CrowdStrike incident. Now we're going to kind of talk about what's going on here and what this means for the future of gaming on Windows and gaming on Linux, and the nature of the kernel-level anti-cheat ecosystem. Now it all starts here in July. Back in July, after the massive CrowdStrike outage that ended up grounding flights and bringing businesses around the world to their knees. And for those of you that were like, oh, I wasn't affected. Well, okay, check out literally all the airports in the world circa July of this past year.
So for those of you who don't know, essentially they had an if check in the kernel's code, or they didn't do an if check in the kernel's code for CrowdStrike, and that blue screened of dev everything. And so now Microsoft is like, oh shit, we fucked up here. Let's move it out of the kernel.
CrowdStrike is a security company. They released a patch. That patch causes Windows machines, unfortunately, to be sod. And the other way to fix this is with an IT person to manually fix them.
CrowdStrike is something that Windows uses. They updated that software and they didn't do an if check properly, and therefore it caused a blue screen of death because it was at the kernel level. Windows machines and critical infrastructure, talk about being a naive optimist. Windows machines are everywhere, bro. They are literally everywhere. You would, if you work for a company for just like 1 year and it has to do with IT, and you come around a lot of customers, you will see Windows machines everywhere. And that's not even the worst part. Like the security there is even worse. So yeah, essentially CrowdStrike caused the blue screen of death because they didn't do a variable check in the code, and that variable check was running, or the code was running at the kernel level of the Microsoft operating system. And since everything basically is using the Microsoft operating system, even though maybe they shouldn't, it all caused the blue screens. You can see this here everywhere.
Not a great place to be if you exist.
The actual error was a logic error within a specific channel file. Some system file, okay, of the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor. This file controls how Falcon evaluates named piked execution on Windows systems. Okay, so that's very, 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 very detailed. Okay, thank you. The Windows kernel has sometime no option but to black screen of death if the kernel lib does something incorrect. Okay, yeah.
So what happened was this company called CrowdStrike, they have a product called Falcon. Falcon is a security as a service product. They put basically a monitor in your computer that looks for malware, and they ship updates to this piece of software that adds to things that it's looking for, right? They're called channel files. Now, when they shipped channel file 291, I won't go into super detail of what happened, but basically they didn't check their code properly before they shipped it, and as a result, it brought the entire world down. One company pushed a bad update and turned off the economy for roughly 8 hours, right?
Awesome.
Not a great place to be. So as a result, Microsoft's talking about locking down the Windows kernel in order to prevent similar issues from arising in the future. According to a Microsoft blog post about the recent Windows Endpoint Security Ecosystem Summit, the company is committing to providing more security capabilities to solution providers outside of kernel mode. Now, you're probably wondering, we're talking a lot about CrowdStrike here. What does this have to do with gaming? Well, there's kind of a big debate going on in the gaming industry right now, and it all has to do with how we look for cheaters, right? There are two solutions that are thought of, and a lot of companies are leaning towards one. You kind of have two options. You have server-side anti-cheat.
I think that I have only encountered Vanguard for League of Legends, so Riot Games. What is it about CSGO? How do they do anti-cheat? Is it server-side for them, or do they also use kernel? CSGO has no really anti-cheat. So maybe they just do some, it is CSGO 2. Yeah, CSGO 2. And it is shit. Why can't people just not cheat, please? Well, because people want to feel good in games, overpowered in games, especially when they fight against others. And cheating just gives them that feeling of being God, essentially. The kernel looks for hardware emulations. Cheats these days emulate fake mouse and keyboard drivers and at times GPU injections. So the kernel is the highest levels to scan memory integrity issues, etc. Yeah, so like you were talking about a aimbot, or in League of Legends, what you would have is a, what is it called? Movement prediction, or like a prediction where a skill shot would land and then it would move your character out of the way. Is it called scripting or something? Scripters.
And client-side anti-cheat. Server-side anti-cheat, as the name implies, is literally look for telemetry coming from a player in terms of actions per minute, making decisions that they couldn't feasibly have made without knowing additional data, or, you know...
Yeah, but sometimes they could have made the decision, like the issue is here where the server doesn't know whether it's possible or not 100% of the time. Like you can make some assumptions, but it's not going to be 100% perfect.
All the processing is done on the server side. There's no code that runs on the client side to do this. And then obviously the opposite of that is client-side anti-cheat. The issue that a lot of client-side anti-cheat solutions have been having recently, and where a lot of the hubbub has come from, is that in order for client-side anti-cheat to work, it has to have privileged access to your computer to look not only into the memory of the process that is running, but the memory of other processes that are running, and also all of the input peripherals that you have. Like,
oh, I get it now. I see how it is. So let's say this is a memory, right? This is the game memory. Another application right here would have their own slot of memory that's separate from this. And usually in the operating system, if the operating system has all of these memory lines available, the operating system is just giving them to these processes, right? Let's say this is endless. One slot would be here and the other slot, this slot is this one right here. And this piece of the memory is here. But this here, right, that could be our cheat program. Cakez, have you seen this? It shows the kernel anti-cheat, and after it is crazy. Vanguard scripting before and after launch. Oh, this is going down, the scripting rate. Damn, that's crazy. Because people were getting banned with those, right? Damn, lol botting game hours. That's crazy. Holy shit, almost gone. I see, so that's why they do this, right? The anti-cheat can look at this memory, right? And then see the differences. This is impressive, I have to say. Like, basically no bots. Wow.
Your keyboard and your mouse to make sure that you don't have some kind of either code that is injecting code into the game or, you know, a fancy peripheral device that clicks the mouse 1,000 times a second, right? There has to be privileged ways of running to give you that level of access. And so as a result, there's been a huge trend towards kernel mode anti-cheat. And kernel mode anti-cheat has been a topic of very controversial discussion. Basically, every major game manufacturer, to include Valve, EA, Riot Games, and Epic Games, all have their own version of kernel mode anti-cheat. Now, if you're new to this channel or don't know what a kernel is, basically your computer has two modes of operation. You have user mode, which is what you're looking at right now. Your browser is a program on your computer, and the kernel is the privileged code that turns on your computer, runs your computer, and does all the super important stuff. If a hacker were to get access to your kernel, they'd be able to do a lot more stuff than a normal virus would do, and as a result, is a huge attack surface for the layman that doesn't really pay attention to the security of their code. And like we saw in CrowdStrike, an issue in the kernel could have huge effects on the world. Either take down the world's economy by blowing up the computers everywhere, or if they got kernel mode access, they'd have privileged access to all the computers if a vulnerability was found. So as a result, people are kind of pissed about just the nature of game development because there's so much kernel mode anti-cheat. This one guy here on Reddit says, the insanity of EA's anti-cheat system by a kernel dev. I've worked on multiple kernels for over a decade, some proprietary, some open source. My work has ranged from fixing security vulnerabilities to making new features of various subsystems, writing and fixing many drivers for all sorts of device classes. I do this for money and as a passion project in my spare time. So this guy has a wide breadth of knowledge. You know, probably should take his opinion seriously. And he goes on to the history of computing. There was a time when kernels did not exist.
He doesn't want them to install the EA game, any EA games that use the system. This is far from the first time the boot level firmware or kernel mode code inserted via patches or drivers have been used to install spyware. But every time I see it happen, I want to warn users about the consequences. So essentially, since they also have access to our kernel, they can spy on us because they can basically do, like how he described, right? They have access to everything. They can look at everything in your computer, all of the data. They can see everything. All of your locked data too. They have access to all of this. It's crazy. Okay.
And programs had complete access to the hardware, and any bug or nefarious bit of code would compromise or crash an entire system. So there is an entire world of OSs before Linux, before Windows, that, you know, there wasn't an OS. When you wrote code, you wrote it on the bare metal, and a bug in that code would compromise the entire system. Now, the whole idea of a kernel was they were invented to isolate user space processes, share resources amongst programs. So you have process A and process B, and they want to talk. That happens through the kernel, and to provide an abstraction layer through which various system services can be requested via a finite number of kernel functions. Now, code running in the kernel has none of this isolation. It is essentially free to do anything it wants with your system, down to controlling all of your hardware. Now, that is a little bit of a reach. Kernel mode code in Intel runs in ring 0. There is code that runs ring -1 and -2, so not completely true.
So, okay, I wonder if you have access to the kernel. Can you turn on the computer at night? What's happening to my PC?
For the most case, if you have kernel mode access to a computer, you can do basically whatever you want to it. The kernel runs in a super privileged mode that allows calling any instruction your CPU can execute. This code also has free access to the internal data structures of the kernel, which are normally hidden from user processes. Now, he kind of wraps this up here. Know that these kernel level systems are extremely dangerous. No game is worth the level of control you give to a developer when they request kernel level access by installing kernel modules or patches, drivers, patches, and modules.
It's already too late for me. I do have Vanguard on my system. It's not running, but
only when they are absolutely necessary and correspond to a hardware device that the kernel does not natively support. And this is a flack that I get from a lot of people when I talk about kernel mode anti-cheat. They're like, oh, Microsoft already has all the drivers in the world. Or like, how do you think your mouse works? And it's like, dude, I fucking get it. Like, I know that my mouse, I can't pick it up, my keyboard or, you know, whatever, has to have a driver to work. But I don't think I should have to install a kernel mode driver for my game to work. I think that's a fucking ridiculous request that no one should be beholden to.
I see. So what the argument is, the mouse has a kernel level access because of the driver. And so why worry about it if the game has one too? It's difficult to say because does the driver get through some sort of check? USB, mouse, video cards, etc. needs ring 0 access.
So anyway, back to this article here. According to the blog post, Microsoft and many of its security partners and vendors have discussed several aspects of the future of security in Windows, but moving security features out of the kernel has some serious implications for the future of gaming on Linux.
Why?
Removing kernel-level security software would mean that anti-cheat software would all have to be implemented with user access, making it much less intrusive and far easier to emulate with translation layers like Wine or Valve's Proton. Wine being Wine is not...
Making it less intrusive and far easier to emulate. Yeah, so essentially emulating, let's say you make a game for Windows, and Wine can be used on, like, I'm pretty sure every Linux person knows this, right? You can use Wine to run Windows games on your Linux machine because it emulates basically the entire Windows system, the libraries, to the Linux libraries. But wouldn't that also give away the power that an anti-cheat has?
An emulator, it's a Windows API stub for Linux. You can run Windows games on Linux. Now, in the Windows blog post at this Ecosystem Security Summit, all the vendors that came to hang out with Microsoft and talk about how to make Windows a better platform for security talked about the following things. And again, the whole idea is to get code out of kernel mode as much as we possibly can because of the security implications we saw not only with CrowdStrike, but just by the design of kernel mode code, right? So they talked about a few things, performance needs and challenges outside of kernel mode. So obviously when you're running a process, the process only gets as much time on the CPU as the operating system will allow. If you have code in the kernel, it is naturally more performant because you get...
Is that the scheduler?
To control how long the kernel mode runs for. Now, obviously, you can't just have a thread run forever in kernel mode because that will also throw an exception, but generally, kernel mode code is a little more performant than user mode code. A big one here is security sensor requirements. So instead of having a piece of code that is custom to every vendor for anti-cheat, what I think Microsoft is trending towards is having there be particular either security sensors or code that already exists that is written by Microsoft.
So, okay, so wait a minute. But okay, so I see Microsoft builds their own anti-cheat and then allows you to use that anti-cheat. And then the anti-cheat returns true if someone cheats or false if someone doesn't, something like that, right? Let's make it very simple. But, like, I don't trust Microsoft, to be honest. I just don't trust them, man. Making bank? Yeah, they would make bank. But listen, man, Microsoft wants to record your entire screen, bro. I don't trust them either. Like, how can I trust Microsoft if they want to do that? I don't know, man. Sounds good, but also like Microsoft, man. Microsoft surely wouldn't do that. Yeah, true. You're right. Yeah, they wouldn't.
In the Windows kernel, where a game can hit the sensor and say, hey, is the computer in a trusted boot state, right? Is there code that is introspecting into game code? Is there potentially devices on this computer that shouldn't be? Maybe it can give the game a score of how much it trusts the platform, and then from there, use that to determine if it'll accept a connection to the server or not, right? Instead of giving the vendor the arbitrary ability to write their own security detection system, maybe Microsoft should just have their own that acts as an API you can call out to from user mode, effectively leaving the kernel mode code only up to be maintained by one person. This is part of the issue that I have with kernel mode anti-cheat is the trend right now is every game company that wants to use kernel mode anti-cheat either has to adhere to one that is already in the wild that already exists, or they make their own. And companies tend to get code wrong, and a lot of the...
I mean, I guess it's a question of trust. Who do you trust more, Microsoft or a company? The gaming company, essentially. This is not very good odds
here. These are closed source, so the more kernel mode code that exists, the more bugs there inevitably will be. And we saw this with Genshin Impact, by the way. There was literally an incident where a ransomware author wrote ransomware code that used a bug in Genshin Impact's kernel mode anti-cheat to bypass antivirus protection. So like literally there was a function in the anti-cheat that had a bug. The ransomware author knew that, and they used the anti-cheat to make it so that you weren't able to tell that the ransomware was actually malware. So this is not the first time we're having this conversation, right? Basically, the less code that we have that exists in the kernel that is written by somebody else, and the more we can standardize what a secure...
I mean, that's good. It's definitely good to have less code written by someone else, because then just one party controls this, and it can be more secure 100%. We still have anti-cheat, which is important. Like, those values are crazy, man. I wasn't expecting this at all. Like, look at the difference. You can implement this, for example, in games like World of Warcraft, where gold botters are a huge problem. Less cakes code are better. They should ban you, bro. Like, actually, it's toxic.
Security sensor for gaming looks like is going to make our lives a lot easier. And obviously you have the traditional boilerplate like development and collaboration principles and secure by design for the future platform. Now, how does this apply to gaming, right? How does this apply to Linux gaming? Well, the idea here is a lot of game developers are nervous about making games for Linux, I think for two reasons. One, potential performance issues, which is going away as, you know, modern platforms like Ubuntu, for example, are getting better with how they handle long-term performance of a system. But also, two, I think Linux is thought of generally as the more modifiable system, the system that hackers use. And as a result, I think game manufacturers that are trying to get into the anti-cheat realm, where they want to make sure that they have a trusted execution, are less likely to write code for Linux. Now, but
Linux has a kernel too. Can't they just write the kernel code for Linux? What's the issue here?
Getting to a place where Microsoft is removing the ability for games to depend on the kernel API because they're not allowing you to ship kernel mode code anymore. I think this makes a really good case for Linux gaming because there's going to be almost no excuse to not send your game to Linux. That being said, if Microsoft is...
Though you still won't have the anti-cheat. Won't you? And I don't know how that works on Linux. That's a bit odd.
Going to replace the convention now with a security sensor, it'll likely be that the Linux kernel will have to come with a security sensor too. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Now,
exactly. So that Linux needs to implement that security themselves too.
On tamper-proofing, there may be other ways for anti-cheat vendors to keep Linux gamers out of their games if they so please, but we'll have to wait and see. So exciting times. I think we are trending towards getting kernel mode code out of our games, getting kernel mode anti-cheat to go away, and it just makes me really, really excited. So
that's
anyway,
awesome.
If you learned something, if you like this video, do me a favor, hit subscribe. I'm trying to get 1 million by the end of the year, and we'll see you in this video.
This guy's getting 1 million by the end of the year. I'm already subscribed. Yeah, he was in the chat too, you know? There we go. Guys, subscribe to him. So he hits 1 million. Yeah, very smart person. Much smarter than I am. Is there any ways we can support him? Learn to code in C at lowlevel.academy. Aha! Guys, you want to learn to code in C? There we go. Look at this. Structs are my favorite type of class. A struct. There you go. Look at that, guys. No, I don't. I already have Rust. Ooh, Rust. Yeah.